The sun is directly above them. There is no shade, no trees, no rocks, only sand. An endless ocean of sand stretching beyond the horizon in every direction. Their lips are cracked. Their throats feel as though they have been scraped with broken glass. The last drops of water inside their bottles are no longer a source of comfort. They are a countdown, one sip closer to death. Somewhere behind them, hundreds of miles away, are the enemy lines they tried to destroy. Somewhere ahead lies the British frontier, but the desert does not reveal where. There are no roads, no signs, no landmarks, only the compass in a shaking hand, and a hope that it has not failed. The men are exhausted. Their bodies are burning during the day and freezing at night. Every step sinks into soft sand, stealing what little strength remains. And they know something even more terrifying. No one is coming to save them. They are alone in the largest desert on Earth. The Sahara does not negotiate. It does not care whether a man wears a German uniform, an Italian uniform, or the badge of Britain's most dangerous soldiers. It kills everyone equally. And now, a small group of men who are supposed to be the hunters have become the hunted. How did some of the most highly trained soldiers in the world end up trapped hundreds of miles behind enemy lines? How did an operation planned in secret become a desperate fight for survival? Was their greatest enemy the Axis forces of North Africa? Or was it the desert itself? The answer begins with a mission that many believed was impossible from the very moment it was proposed. A mission created by a man who refused to accept the rules of conventional warfare. A young Scottish officer named David Stirling. In 1941, the war in North Africa had become a battle of movement. Armies were not fighting over cities or forests. They were fighting over emptiness. Thousands of miles of barren desert separated the forces of Britain and the Commonwealth from the armies of Germany and Italy. Across this brutal landscape moved the legendary Afrika Korps under General Erwin Rommel. Fast, aggressive, unpredictable, Rommel's armored columns could appear where they were least expected, strike hard, and disappear back into the desert. The British needed a way to hit back, not with large armies, not with tanks, but with something the enemy would never expect. Small groups of men moving silently behind the front lines. Saboteurs, raiders, ghosts. That idea belonged to David Stirling. Tall, unconventional, and often described as impossible to control. Stirling believed that a handful of determined soldiers could cause more damage behind enemy lines than thousands of men attacking from the front. His idea was simple. Attack the enemy where he feels safest. His airfields, his fuel depots, his supply lines. Destroy his aircraft while the pilots sleep. Burn his fuel. Disappear before dawn. It was a revolutionary idea. And in July 1941, the Special Air Service was born. The SAS was not yet the legendary unit we know today. There were no decades of tradition, no famous victories, no reputation, only a small group of volunteers, many of whom had no idea that they were about to become part of one of the most dangerous experiments of the Second World War. Among them was a brilliant officer named Jock Lewes. If Stirling was a dreamer, Lewes was a man who turned dreams into reality. He developed new explosives, new training methods, new ways of surviving in the desert. His men learned to move quietly, to endure exhaustion, and to operate with minimal support. They had to become self-sufficient, because once they crossed into enemy territory, there would be no backup, no reinforcements, no second chance. And soon, that theory would be tested. The first major SAS operation was given a name that sounded almost harmless: Operation Squatter. The objective was devastating. On the night of November 16, 1941, SAS teams would parachute deep behind enemy lines and attack several Axis airfields around the areas of Gazala and Tamimi in Libya. If successful, dozens of German and Italian aircraft could be destroyed on the ground. The timing was critical. The British Eighth Army was preparing a major offensive known as Operation Crusader. The SAS attack would create chaos behind enemy lines at exactly the moment British forces struck from the front. It was a bold plan, perhaps too bold. There was one major problem. Most of the SAS men had little experience with combat parachute operations, and the desert had a habit of turning small problems into deadly ones. Still, The mission moved forward. The men prepared their weapons. They checked their explosives. They memorized their targets. Many were excited. Some were nervous. Almost none of them imagined what was waiting for them in the darkness over Libya. Then, on the night of the operation, the weather changed. The sky became a battlefield before the soldiers had even touched the ground. Powerful winds swept across the desert. Sandstorms reduced visibility. The aircraft carrying the SAS teams were thrown through violent turbulence. Inside the planes, the men waited. Heavy equipment strapped to their bodies. Explosives attached to their legs. Faces covered with blackened camouflage. They could hear the engines screaming. They could feel the aircraft shaking. Some looked at each other in silence. No one wanted to say what everyone was thinking. This was not the night to jump. But the order came anyway. Go. One by one, the men stepped into the darkness. And almost immediately, everything went wrong. The wind scattered them across miles of desert. Some men landed hard and broke bones. Others disappeared into the night. Equipment containers were lost. Explosives vanished beneath the sand. Several soldiers were killed before they even had the chance to fight. The mission had not reached the enemy. The desert had destroyed it first. Those who survived the landing looked around and saw only darkness. No vehicles, no friendly faces, no idea where many of their comrades had landed. The carefully planned attack had become a nightmare. And the worst part? The enemy did not even know they were there yet. The men had survived the jump. But now they faced a terrible question. How do you escape from a place where even finding your own comrades can be impossible? The answer would depend on a group of men who knew the desert better than almost anyone alive, the long-range desert group. But reaching them would be a journey through a world where every mile could be their last. For some of the men scattered across the Sahara, the true battle had only just begun. The desert was silent, too silent. No gunfire, no explosions, no sound of victory, only the whisper of the wind moving over the sand where, just hours earlier, dozens of Britain's newest commandos had fallen from the sky. Operation Squatter was over, and it had failed. Of the approximately 60 men who had jumped into the Libyan desert that night, many never reached their targets. Some were killed during the landing. Others were injured, lost, or separated by miles of empty terrain. For the survivors, the mission had changed. They were no longer attackers. They were castaways in a sea of sand. Imagine opening your eyes after a violent parachute landing. Your body is bruised. Your equipment is scattered. The storm has erased every trace of where your comrades came down. There is no radio contact, no vehicle, no map that can tell you exactly where your friends are. Only a compass, a few supplies, and a terrifying realization. The enemy is not the biggest danger. Time is. Every hour spent searching for lost men means more water consumed. Every wrong direction means more strength wasted. Every decision carries a price. And in the Sahara, that price is often paid in blood. Among those trying to survive was David Stirling himself. The man who had convinced the British command to create the SAS was now experiencing the brutal reality of his own idea. His men were scattered across enemy territory. Some had never even reached the ground alive. Others had watched their equipment disappear into the darkness as the wind carried it away. The operation that was supposed to announce the arrival of a new kind of warfare had become a disaster. For many military leaders, this would have been the end of the experiment. The SAS would be remembered as a failed idea, a dangerous fantasy that had cost good men their lives. But the story was not over. Because somewhere beyond the dunes, another group of soldiers was preparing to enter one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. They were the men of the long-range desert group. The LRDG was unlike any military unit of its time, formed by Major Ralph Bagnall, an explorer who had spent years studying Sahara. These men understood something that most armies did not. The desert had its own rules, and anyone who ignored those rules would die. Bagnall and his men learned how to navigate using the stars, the sun, and specially modified compasses designed to work despite the magnetic interference caused by their vehicles. They mastered long-distance travel across areas where maps showed nothing but blank spaces. They found hidden wells, created secret routes, and crossed landscapes that many believed were impossible to traverse. Their trucks became lifelines, loaded with fuel, food, spare parts, machine guns, ammunition, and more valuable than gold in the Sahara, water. The LRDG Chevrolet trucks were not elegant machines. They were covered in dust, loaded far beyond what they were designed to carry. Their engines suffered under the relentless heat. Their tires were constantly threatened by sharp stones and endless miles of punishment. But these vehicles could travel where ordinary military transport could not, and their crews became the eyes and ears of the British Army deep behind enemy lines. Now, they had a new mission: find the lost SAS men before the desert claimed them. The rescue would not be simple. Nobody knew exactly where all the survivors were. The storm had scattered them over a massive area. Every search route consumed precious fuel. Every day that passed reduced the chances of finding men alive. The LRDG patrols moved through the desert like hunters, scanning the horizon, watching for movement, looking for parachutes caught on rocks, searching for footprints that the wind had not yet erased. Sometimes they found signs of life. Sometimes they found only abandoned equipment or bodies, silent reminders of what the Sahara did to those who underestimated it. For the SAS survivors still walking, the days became a battle against their own bodies. The heat during daylight could push temperatures high enough to turn a simple march into torture. Sweat evaporated before they even noticed it. Their mouths became dry. Their thoughts became slower. A man could begin walking the wrong direction and not realize his mistake until it was too late. Water discipline became everything. No reckless drinking. No satisfying thirst. Only measured sips. Enough to keep the body moving. Not enough to feel comfortable. Comfort was no longer part of their world. Then came the nights. The same desert that burned them during the day now became freezing cold. The temperature dropped dramatically. Men wrapped themselves in whatever they had. Some shivered through the darkness, waiting for the sunrise they had feared only hours before. Sleep was never complete. Every sound could be a patrol. Every shadow could be an enemy vehicle. The Germans and Italians controlled the territory around them. If they were discovered, capture was almost certain, and in their weakened state, escape would be impossible. But there was another enemy they had not prepared for: the mind. The Sahara attacked more than the body. It attacked hope, days without seeing another human being. The same endless horizon, the same dunes, the same burning sun. Men began asking themselves questions they did not dare say aloud. Are we walking in the right direction? Is anyone searching for us? How much water do we have left? Will anyone ever know where we died? Those thoughts would destroy a man faster than thirst. The greatest survivors understood one rule: never think about the whole journey, only the next hour, the next hill, the next step. Eventually, some survivors began seeing something in the distance, shapes on the horizon, dark figures moving across the sand. For a moment, nobody knew what they were: enemy patrols, a mirage, or salvation. They raised their weapons and waited. The figures grew larger. The outline of trucks appeared. Then came a sight that many thought they would never see again. British vehicles. The long-range desert group had found them. For some men, the nightmare was finally ending. But not everyone would return. The storm, the failed mission, and the desert had taken their toll. More than 20 men were lost during Operation Squatter, a devastating beginning for a unit that had not yet earned its reputation. The SAS had suffered a humiliating first defeat. Most organizations would have disappeared after such a disaster. But David Stirling learned something that would change the future of special operations forever. The parachutes had failed. The desert had defeated them. So the next time they entered enemy territory, they would not come from the sky. They would come from the ground. And they would arrive with the only men who truly knew how to conquer the Sahara, the long-range desert group. Together, they would return to the enemy's airfields. And this time, they would make history. Failure has a strange effect on men. For some, it destroys confidence. It becomes a wound that never heals, a reminder of what they were not capable of achieving. But for others, failure becomes a lesson. And in the winter of 1941, in the deserts of North Africa, the survivors of Operation Squatter made a decision. they would return. The British High Command had every reason to cancel the SAS experiment. The first operation had been a disaster. Men had died before they had even reached the enemy. Aircraft had been lost. Equipment had vanished into the desert. The results were almost nothing compared to the cost. Many officers considered the entire concept unrealistic. A small group of soldiers operating hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, attacking heavily guarded military targets, then disappearing without a trace. It sounded more like a fantasy than a military strategy. But David Stirling refused to accept defeat. He knew the problem had not been the men. It had been the method. The parachute drop had placed the SAS at the mercy of the desert wind. The Sahara had chosen where they landed. The Sahara had decided who survived. That could never happen again. The SAS wanted to become hunters again. They needed a way to choose their own battlefield. The answer was waiting in the desert. The long-range desert group. The SAS were the knife. The LRDG was the hand that carried it. And soon, the Germans would discover a terrifying truth. There was nowhere they were truly safe. The new plan was simple. Drive deep behind Axis lines. Hide the trucks far from the target. Approach the enemy airfields on foot. Strike fast. Destroy as many aircraft as possible. Then disappear back into the endless sea of sand before the enemy could react. But the success of this new strategy would depend on one night. One silent approach, one weapon designed by Jock Lewes, an array that would transform the SAS from a failed experiment into a legend. The first real opportunity to prove this new strategy came in December 1941. The target was the Axis airfield at Tamat, near the Libyan coast. David Stirling led a small force of SAS men transported hundreds of miles through the desert by the long-range desert group. Even reaching the target was a mission in itself. Their trucks crossed landscapes where a simple mechanical failure could become a death sentence. A broken axle, a damaged engine, a destroyed tire, a wrong turn in an endless wilderness. Any one of these could leave a patrol stranded with little water and no hope of rescue. Every man understood the risk. Once they crossed the invisible line into enemy territory, they were alone. The night of the attack arrived. The desert was cold. The sky was black. The silence felt unnatural. Then shadows began to move across the sand. SAS soldiers carrying explosives slowly approached the sleeping airfield. Ahead of them stood the aircraft of the Axis forces, machines that had been bombing British troops, protecting Rommel's advance, helping maintain the enemy's control over North Africa. Every step mattered. One careless movement, one unexpected sound, one guard turning his head at the wrong moment. And the mission would become a desperate fight for survival. But the enemy never saw them coming. Jock Lewes had created a simple but devastating weapon, the Lewes bomb. Small, lightweight, designed for sabotage. The SAS soldiers attached the charges to aircraft engines and fuel systems. The timers were activated. The men disappeared back into the darkness. For a few moments, nothing happened, only silence. Then the desert exploded. One aircraft burst into flames. Then another. Then another. The night sky turned orange as Axis planes burned where they stood. For the first time, David Stirling's vision had become reality. A handful of men had struck a powerful enemy, destroyed valuable equipment, and disappeared before the enemy could understand what had happened. The ghost of the desert had arrived. The Germans were shocked. How had British soldiers reached an airfield hundreds of miles behind the front line? How could they attack and disappear without leaving a battlefield behind? The answer was terrifying. The desert itself had become a highway for invisible enemies. Again and again, SAS teams emerged from the emptiness. Airfields, fuel depots, supply dumps, communication centers. Nothing was beyond their reach. Axis soldiers began looking over their shoulders. Pilots who had once feared enemy fighters in the sky now feared footsteps in the darkness. The safest place in the desert was no longer safe. As the months passed, the SAS and LRDG pushed farther and farther into enemy territory. Their journeys covered incredible distances, sometimes thousands of miles of driving across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Their trucks became moving islands of survival. Every gallon of fuel was calculated. Every liter of water was measured. Every spare part had a purpose. There was no room for mistakes. The desert did not forgive mistakes. A man could survive an enemy ambush. He could fight. He could hide. He could escape. But a man without water in the Sahara had only one enemy: time. The sun would rise. The heat would come. His body would begin to consume itself. First came exhaustion, then confusion, then hallucinations. Finally, silence. The desert had claimed another victim. That knowledge followed every patrol, every single day. Many of the men who served in those operations later remembered the strange loneliness of the Sahara. Days without seeing another person. No villages, no trees, no sounds except the wind and the engines of their trucks. The horizon never changed. It was as if they were driving across another planet. And perhaps that was what made the desert such a perfect battlefield for the SAS. The enemy believed nobody could survive there. Nobody could travel that far. Nobody could appear from such impossible directions. That belief became their weakness. The partnership between the SAS and the Long Range Desert Group became one of the most successful collaborations in military history. The LRDG carried the warriors into the darkness. The SAS delivered the strike. The LRDG was the map. The SAS was the weapon. Together, they changed the rules of war. By the end of the North African campaign, the SAS had destroyed hundreds of enemy aircraft, massive quantities of fuel, and critical supplies. They forced the Axis command to divert soldiers and resources away from the front lines. A small number of men had achieved results once thought possible only for entire divisions. But the cost was heavy. Many never returned. Some were killed during raids. Others disappeared into the desert. Their graves were not marked by stone. No crosses, no monuments. Only endless sand moved by the wind. A battlefield that erased its own history. David Stirling himself would eventually be captured by German forces in Tunisia in January 1943. The Germans considered him so dangerous that he became one of their highest value prisoners. Even inside prison camps, he repeatedly attempted to escape. The same stubborn determination that carried him across the Sahara refused to disappear behind barbed wire. Jock Lewes never lived to see the full legacy of the organization he helped create. He was killed during a raid on an enemy airfield in December 1941. But his ideas survived him. His explosives, his training methods, his philosophy of speed, surprise, and independence became part of the DNA of the SAS. After the Desert War, the SAS would continue fighting across Europe. They parachuted into occupied France, worked with resistance fighters, destroyed railways, attacked enemy communication networks. The methods developed among the sands of North Africa would influence special operations forces around the world for decades to come. But perhaps the greatest lesson the Sahara was not military. It was human. The men who crossed that ocean of sand were not machines. They were afraid. They suffered. They doubted. They felt thirst so powerful that it consumed every thought. They watched friends disappear. They made impossible decisions. And still, they kept moving. One step, then another, then another. The Sahara stripped away everything except the will to survive. No rank mattered. No medals mattered. No reputation mattered. Only the next mile, the next drop of water, the next sunrise, the next chance to stay alive. The desert judged every man equally, and those who returned carried its scars for the rest of their lives. Today, the story of the early SAS and the Long Range Desert Group remains one of the most extraordinary survival stories of the Second World War. Not because they fought the biggest battles. They did not. Not because they had the largest armies. They did not. Their greatness came from something far rarer. A small group of men entered a place where almost everything was against them. The enemy, the distance, the heat, the loneliness, the uncertainty. And somehow, they came back. The tracks of their trucks disappeared long ago. The wind buried their footprints. The desert erased almost every physical sign that they had ever been there, but it could not erase the legend, because in the endless silence of Sahara, a new kind of warrior was born, a warrior who could travel farther, endure longer, strike harder, and survive where others could not. The world would come to know them as the Special Air Service, the SAS, And their first battlefield was not only against the armies of Hitler and Mussolini, it was against the oldest enemy of all, the Earth itself. In the vast emptiness of the Sahara, the enemy was not only the army hunting them, it was the desert itself. And the fact that any of them returned at all remains one of the greatest survival stories of the Second World War.